Hello, I'm Rebecca George, the current president of the BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT, and I'm delighted to be hosting an interview today with two very special people. Dame Stephanie Shirley, known as Steve, and Professor Dame Wendy Hall. Both are previous presidents of the BCS, the Chartered Institute of IT. Welcome, both of you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Steve is a workplace revolutionary and successful IT entrepreneur turned ardent philanthropist. She set up freelance programmers in 1962 and went on to create a global business and made many of her colleagues millionaires before retiring and devoting her life to philanthropy. She was the UK's first national ambassador for philanthropy. Wendy was a co-founder of the Web Science Research Initiative and has remained an inspirational leader in her field. She's now the UK government's first skills champion for artificial intelligence. And last year, she was appointed chair of the Ada Lovelace Institute. So let's start, please, with your time as BCS president. What were the big issues when you were president? Steve, do you want to start?
Well, I go back to 1989-90, which does seem a long way ago, but I can remember it as if it was yesterday because it wasn't a year that I really enjoyed very much. The BCS at that time was very academic. The council meetings were held in a U-shaped format so that people actually had their backs to each other. So all the things that I'd learned in business about how to make things happen, how to get people on side, really had to be turned upside down. And I spent my year trying to move it from the academic side to thinking about the impact of information technology. And we were just starting to use that term on industry generally. And so when I went around all the branches, and I think every president is persuaded to do this, the theme very much was to give examples of how information technology really made a commercial difference, an economic impact on the country.
Fantastic and challenging, really challenging. I'm not sure I'd have liked sitting in a U shape with my back to people. Wendy, what about you?
Well, my year was a big year for the BCS because it was the year we changed our constitution, totally changed it. And we brought on board the Chartered IT professional and we changed the structure of the council and we started to look for new offices. So what Steve said about that, the old office with the U-shaped council where everyone had to sit with their backs to each other because the council was too big. During my year, we actually reduced the size of council hugely. And we also created I don't know what you call it today, Rebecca, the exec that makes the decisions.
Well, the trustee board.
The trustee board, exactly. So it was moving to the new way of running the sorts of organizations. You had trustee board and then you had do you still call it the council?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was the trustee board that makes the decisions in council. And I remember all the discussions about, well, what's the role of council then? Because and people were elected. But anyway, that constitution was passed during my presidency, so I had to oversee that.
Remind me, Wendy.
2003, 2004.
Oh yeah, okay.
And also, I think your presidency is very much defined by who the CEO is. So I worked my way up through the BCS when Judith Scott was the CEO, lovely woman who did wonders was she the CEO when you were president?
I cannot remember who was.
So you was it was.
I think we called them a secretary general or something like that.
Yes. Well, I think Judith was the CEO but anyway, I worked my way up through the organisation but then just before I became president, David Clark came over and he was the instigator really of the new constitution and the CITP and the trustee board and it was quite a lot to get through because it wasn't accepted by everybody. Not everybody likes change. A lot of people are very resistant and people felt that you know, sort of the running of the organization should be by the members. And then the other thing was, my successor was David Morris, and he had all the skills to scope out the new office building. So while I was president, he was deputy president, and he was searching for the new offices, which of course we are now in, and we moved in when the year I was past president and David was president. So it was actually quite a major year for the society.
Yeah. How did you fit that workload in, Wendy?
The University of Southampton, where I have worked for a long time, they were happy that I was president. They allowed me. They allowed me to have the time to do it, but I was also head of department at the time, head of department of electronics and computer science. So it wasn't an easy year in that respect. And I did a lot of traveling too. I did Mauritius, I didn't do Sri Lanka, and I went all around the UK, including Jersey and Guernsey and various outposts, outflung far corners of the...
And what about you, Steve?
It's a matter of such pride to be able to represent one's professional body. I look back at it with you know, I'm glad it's over, but nevertheless, I'm enormously proud of having done it.
So am I, absolutely. And I think I was sorry when it came to an end. I mean, we're looking at Rebecca finishing her term in 2 weeks' time. I was sorry because you suddenly become, as I can't remember, I think it was Geoffrey McMullen said to me, he was a president before me, and he said, Wendy, there's nothing so past as a past president. because you suddenly, the next day, you're not the person everyone wants to talk to. It's the next president.
I mean, I'm sometimes introduced as Steve Shirley. She has been this, she has been that. Yeah. And I always say, I'm not a has-been. I'm saying,
my husband calls me a has-dean because I used to be a dean.
Very clever.
But I think you're both great examples of not becoming has-beens and continuing to do new things. And I think it would be, really interesting, Steve, perhaps to just ask you a little bit about your journey, and how did your journey from that kitchen table with £6 in 1962 get you to the Oxford Internet Institute today?
Well, people talk about my overnight success, but actually it was a very slow burn, President. It took 25 years before the company paid a dividend. But I began to be interested more and more with not clever things like as that Wendy can do with the technology, but much more with the social impact of information technology, of expert systems that were coming in my day, of the beginning of the 5G computing. And to concentrate on that was triggered an approach that I should sponsor the what became the Oxford Internet Institute. And to begin with, frankly, I said no, I wasn't interested, because at that time I'd already moved very much to my philanthropy, to my late son's condition of autism. And then they cleverly said to me, but this will keep you in touch with the industry from which your wealth stems. And that made a lot of sense to me. And certainly I found it a very stimulating project. And this it is right and proper that the money that came from the IT industry should be invested back in it. So that's how I got into the Oxford Internet Institute. It took about 18 months of talking about excruciating slow process because I mean, business it seems to work on a different pace to academe. But we got there in the end. I served on its strategy board for 10 years and then stood down from that. And I'm delighted with some of the work that it's doing. Not that I understand it all, but I get the general, to understand what life online is like, how to deal with false information, how to know or find out where information comes from. You know, these are issues that, yes, of course, they're deeply technical, but it's the impact of them, it's what they're actually concerned with that really fascinate me.
I think I couldn't agree more. I am very blessed in having a mother who's 87 and very, very tech savvy, still practicing as a priest, but nevertheless, somebody tries to scam her nearly every day.
Really?
And so how we manage that issue of where the information is coming from, and can we trust it, and what's being done with it, I just think it's central to our mission of making IT good for society.
And I think that's something that the BCS is concerned with, that if the speaker of the information is trustworthy and has a reputation, in our case, it was a chartered body, people can start off with a confidence, yes, this is credible.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask a question I know loads of people ask you, but I think the people who are watching this video will want to know, why Steve?
I date from the days really when women were very second-class citizens. And when I wrote marketing, business development letters, which was before the days of word processing, so they were sent about 10 or 12 a week to potential customers of my company's services, they received no reply because a letter from a Stephanie just wasn't worthy, apparently, of people's attention. So my dear husband actually suggested that I use the family nickname of Steve. And instead of this double feminine of Stephanie Shirley, I had Steve Shirley. And the same letters addressed to the same sort of people began to get some replies. And President, then I managed to get some interviews, and then I managed to get some work, and the company took off. I've been Steve ever since, really.
Well, and it suits you, I will say. But I wish that wasn't still the case. But I just read an article in the paper last week about a woman who used a man's name and found that she was getting more exposure. So it's still a challenge.
Yeah.
It's still a challenge today.
And you notice that there are a lot of androgynous names, Joe and Leslie's and so on. So J.K. Rowling is the one I normally quote. You know, how come that such a brilliant writer had to anonymize her gender before her books were accepted?
Yeah, I agree. Let's hope things are going to keep changing though. And what about being a philanthropist? Tell us a little bit about how that came about and your passion for it.
Well, I was helped as a child because I was an unaccompanied refugee. And so many complete strangers helped me that, frankly, how could I not give back? And so my life really has been targeted to ensure that the life that was saved from Nazi Europe was worth saving. And so I try not to fritter my time away, and I try to do serious things, and I try always to do the right thing, not just do things right in my rather perfectionist way. Because I tried to use all my business experience in my giving, I've really turned into what's called a venture philanthropist. So I see problems, I conjecture a solution, I'll get it manned, staffed, planned, launched, and generally I try to take it to sustainability, by which I mean it's managerially and financially independent of me.
So Steve, thanks very much for that background on how you came to be a philanthropist. So tell us a little bit about your upcoming book.
Over the years, one of the things I've been doing for philanthropy is give speeches to various organizations, to fundraising and so on. And when lockdown started, I really began to think, well, what am I going to do if I can't go out to these various functions, if I can't go and give speeches? So I decided to make an anthology of the speeches that I've given over the last 40 years, and there are many. So I selected, in fact, 29 that pretty well covered my interests, and it was almost like a biography again.
Yeah.
You can learn so much about me from the speeches. But some of them are dated. They refer to rather old-fashioned technology. Some of them are trying to look ahead, and they are less dated. And they talk about my philanthropy, women in business, women generally. My refugee start is one of the first ones. And I've given these speeches to all over the world, really, to people who really want to have some significance in their lives, to make something worthwhile. And this is why the BCS is so important to, I think, all of us. It is something really worthwhile that we have. I was a founder member as a student, but we've all loved and coveted it and done our little bit in our presidential year. So congratulations to you, by the way, on how you're doing this year.
Thank you. And thank you for that, and saying that the BCS is important. I completely agree, and I completely agree that having professionally accredited IT industries is absolutely critical. And last night I had a brilliant session with our new Embrace group. We set up as a part of the response to Black Lives Matters. And there's a group of passionate young people who really want, IT to be good for society, and they want to do good things, and every single one of them volunteers. It was so inspirational. I loved it.
And I'm sure Wendy would agree that the rate of change is so fast. It'll never be as slow again. And the exciting thing really is that it will never come to an end. We're never going to be bored. There's always something new. There's no sort of end point to the delight that we have in computing.
I love the way you put it, and I think you're absolutely right. And Wendy, turning to you, like Steve, your work has built foundations that we absolutely completely take for granted today. And you pioneered work in linking different parts of information together in what you called hypermedia. And, just as Steve has said, in our fast-moving industry, how does it feel to have been the inventor of something we all take for granted right now?
They do sort of, I hadn't realized until today how they do in a way tell the story, because I started out as a pure mathematician, right, and then moved into computing when the personal computers came out in the 80s, and quite quickly discovered this idea of hypermedia, which at the time was really quite wacky. It was, being able to link information that's stored on computers using what Ted Nelson called hypertext links. And in those days, it wasn't considered computer science. And I was told very firmly by a professor at Southampton that there was no room for me either in computer science or in Southampton if I didn't go back to being what a real computer scientist was, writing compilers or doing programming languages. But luckily, the boss, the head of the department, David Barron, who will be well known to many people in a BCS audience, he's no longer with us, but he supported me and was probably my first mentor in that sense. And all the things we were doing then, I mean, I got really excited about the ability to put a video on a computer. What are we doing today? Right? And the fact that we can carry it all around in our pockets and our handbags. In those days, this was really science fiction. There was nothing digital, right? The video was on a separate laser video display. We had to write drivers to display it on the computer, drivers to do the interaction. But I could see that this was going to transform the world. I didn't see how exactly. And I got into this idea of hypermedia. We developed a system at Microcosm at Southampton called Microcosm, which was actually a fabulous system, but it was a fabulous system, and we made a lot of money. It was a big company. I launched a company, but it was written on a Windows PC. It was proprietary standards, and at the same time, I met Tim Berners-Lee, who was just beginning to develop the web, and his standards, of course, were open and free and universal and based on the internet, which was what enabled it to take off. And the rest, as they say, is history. But I suppose in some ways I was right place, right time, but I think that I could see what was going to be possible. I couldn't exactly see how, and I didn't think of all the consequences. That will come in the next book. But at the time we wrote Hypermedia and the Web was in the late 90s, when the web was just beginning to be established. Google didn't emerge until about 1999, 2000. and Facebook didn't emerge till 2004, 2005. So, you know, it was the early days of the web, but it was all about how do you build a website, and the excitement of finding things on the internet that you want.
But it is this business of never stopping, never getting to an end. I've just been reading about some work being done by BT, and I'm ex-BT, which is, I suppose, why I keep an eye on what they're doing. They're talking about 3D video, where the video is actually, viewers can move around within the so-called 3D image. They can have any perspective. It's unbelievable. And okay, it's still in the research laboratory, but this is just round the corner.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot. That's what's exciting. That's why I'm still doing it. There's
So
still
then,
more
you know,
stuff around the corner. What?
Building on that, you know, this all these new things that are coming, the speed of change, but also what we've learned this year, you know, above everything else, is how fantastically important the digital world is for all of us and for how we live and work and play. Wendy, you've said that the digital planet is as important for us to conserve and build for the good of humanity as the physical planet, and I agree. Tell us more about what you'd like to see change to make this happen.
So I think that the big thing, I mean, I've written the book on social machines is very much about this. That's how we work. You know, these systems are not just technology, it's people and technology working together to co-create the web, Google, Facebook, Twitter, but we feel like we don't have any power over those. And when you think about what's happening and happened with the way they use our data, which we give to them quite freely because we get a lot back in return, like, you know, the ability to do what we're doing today. But it's in the newspapers every day, the headlines about the standoff between governments and the social media companies, how our data is protected or not protected and used for companies to do what they will with. That's the digital planet. And the thing, what I'll explain what you've asked me in terms of COVID, because just imagine if COVID had happened 20 or 30 years ago, right? And we hadn't had an internet. Mm-hmm. How would we have kept in touch with each other? How would we have known what was going on? It would have been a very different type of world. And when last year in February, March, when everything went online, the internet stayed up. It was resilient. It was resilient.
Very resilient.
Going online. A huge testament to the people who designed it back in the 60s and 70s. And what Tim did, you know, a huge testament to them that it's still, but it's under more threat than it's ever been. Threat from, you know, big companies, from the nation states that want to attack us through it, from the horrible things that happen on it that we don't know how to, you know, the pornography and the things about terrorism and, you know, child abuse and all this. The stuff that, you know, we didn't think about when we were designing it in the first, when we were building it, because it was like we thought everyone would want to do good with it. And to me, it's really important. We've seen how important it is to us. And we've got to make sure that as it grows in the future, nobody owns the internet. It's not a company, right? It is owned actually by us. It is ours. But we have to put some faith in our governments to bring in the right regulations and our companies.
I mean, it is a tremendous responsibility.
Yeah. And I was going to say that, you know, I wonder with the advent of 5G, whether actually that problem that you talked about, Wendy, might get worse rather than better.
Of course.
I worry that the advent of global private networks running alongside and coexisting and interacting with the internet actually is going to give more opportunity.
Well, this is what the book that's coming out for internets, which you've got the cover for on the slides, but is not out till June. I've written with my colleague Kieran O'Hara. This is exactly what it's about: the geopolitical pressures on the internet that could see it break up. And, you know, for us, the preciousness of it is we've got one system that we can, everyone could do everything on it. If it does break up, then it ceases to be an internet in the sense of how it was designed. And of course, you were talking about 3D video, Steve, you know, the internet's going to satellite. Yeah, one of the private networks. And Vince Cerf gives a wonderful talk about interplanetary internet, because for sure, if you're going to go to Mars, you're going to want an internet, aren't you? So the internet will go into cyberspace in the true sense of the word.
What sort of time scale would you guess?
Elon Musk has already got his satellites up there, hasn't he?
Yeah.
So I think that's the beginning of it. I would guess I don't know, within the foreseeable future, there will be colonies on the moon, and it will go there. And then it will, Vint talks about it scaffolding, you know, sort of series of satellites or whatever, scaffolding it to Mars. So that might not be in our lifetime.
But coming back to our lifetimes, so, there's a question that's come in from the audience, actually, but it was also a question that I was thinking about asking, and it kind of links to this subject, which is, you know, we've all learned how to do things differently in the last year. We're all doing what we're doing today differently than we would have done it a year ago. What have you learned, Steve? What have you learned in the last year, and how have you benefited from what's been going on?
Well, I thought about this quite a bit, because I almost feel embarrassed that I haven't been disadvantaged more, because I've always worked from home. So that's the main thing, working from home, distributed working. But when I look back over a ghastly year of 2020, it's really brought home to me how important my work is to me. Now, it's all unpaid work these days, writing books, opening offices or whatever it might be, and a lot of speeches, because that's where I get my thoughts in order when I'm preparing a speech. But without work, I think I would have gone absolutely stark crazy, because I've hardly seen anyone. Yes, there's television, yes, there are books, but I tend not to read a lot. And I had no idea it was so ingrained in me. I've always been a workaholic. So that was the thing that surprised me.
Thank you. Really interesting. I have thought that myself as well, many times over the last year, how lucky I am to have a job I adore and engages me completely. How about you, Wendy?
Well, yes, I don't know. I'll do things differently. I see. I haven't seen like Steve. I've been in this house now for a year. I've hardly gone out. Not seeing very many people at all. I haven't seen my office. I have an office in the university. Obviously, I'm still a full-time professor, and I haven't seen my office since last March. And I used to spend all my time on an aeroplane. I mean, you will both remember I traveled a huge amount, and I loved it. I love it. But two things. One, I've found that I can still stay in touch with my international friends through this medium. So it's not as good as it was, and I miss the dinners and the social, but it's quite feasible. And the other thing, actually there's going to be three things. Like Steve, I'm a workaholic in a sense of I love what I do, and having work to do structures my day while I'm at home. So I can, you know, I'm busier than ever actually, which is a bit tiring on Zoom. But the third thing is that I've learned, putting all that together, I look out in my garden, which I'm very lucky to have, and I see more birds, and I see the moss on the trees. I tweeted about this the other day, and I see nature coming back because we are polluting it less. And I have learned that lesson. That is a lesson I have learned. So I will travel again when we're allowed. I will travel, but I won't do the stupid New York and back in 24 hours, or the, you know, Singapore for 2 days, right? I will be much more careful about.
And you know, Wendy, I so hope we all follow your example. I hope
much
the business does that too. Sorry, Wendy.
No, that's the plan.
Yeah, that's the plan. I mean, I
know when someone says to me, will you do a seminar on such a day, like in New York, I was going to do it last June, and I could only do it by squeezing in a a 24-hour trip to New York, you know, on the regular plane, no Concorde, of course. And nowadays I'd say, well, that's stupid. If you want me, I'll come, you know, I can be there, but I'll come on Zoom. Right?
So that's what I hope the model is going to be going forward, that people will travel more thoughtfully and less. And also that we work out how to have, as we talked about earlier, Steve, that hybrid existence, so that we can have people in the room and remotely at the same time, and both feel like they're as important as each other.
But also, President, that an individual is part office-based and part home-based.
Yeah.
And that's the plan. Either 2 days,
absolutely.
3 days, 4 days, 1 day, or whatever it is.
And I think we think about the IT profession. I think there are many people, and I'm talking to many people who are telling me this, that they want that hybrid. They want to be able to be at home and be at the office when they choose. And ideally, when they go to the office, they'd like that to be closer to where they live. So that's going to cause some interesting dynamics around retention of key staff and key skills, I think.
I think we'll see. I mean, there are all sorts of changes. You know, the big department stores are going, and the new chairwoman of John Lewis was saying the other day that they're going to change some of their stores into residential flats and so on. And I think we will see major changes that really think about how society wants to be. So it'll be convenience stores with where people live, rather than these big department stores that because it's so easy to shop online.
You know, the office accommodation, various estimates are coming out from this country and elsewhere, and it's 30, 40, sometimes 50% reduction in office accommodation, which does open the thought that here may be some residences, and we are still in this country desperately short of decent places for people to live.
And I think there's no excuse now for councils to fill that need. Because, as Rebecca said, people want to work closer to home. They don't want the commute, which is also the bad thing for the climate.
But
we also
they don't want to waste that time on the commute.
No, but we also have an aging community who increasingly, I think, will want to live where they can get to what they need, their local services, GPs, shopping centres, cafes, restaurants, on foot. So reimagining the high street, you know, I think that's an opportunity.
It's a huge opportunity.
What is the BCS doing, Rebecca?
So we actually have beautiful new offices. We have beautiful offices in London that we've hardly seen. You open them, I think. Yeah. And then we also have a new headquarters office in Swindon. Which has been largely unoccupied, but going forward, I think we will see a continuation for staff of working from home and going to the office when there's a requirement to do so, and for the volunteers, the 70,000 specialists and branches and the communities we have, the boards. I think they'll all be hybrid going forward. I would be really surprised if they're not.
In the BCS strategic plan, is the mention of some of these changes, or is it too early to see the impact?
So interestingly, we just had a strategy day, and this specific wasn't one of the outcomes, but what was addressing digital poverty. And for me, this is a critical issue going forward. We've identified that up to 17 million people in the UK of all ages are in digital poverty in some way or another. And it's not just the obvious stuff like people don't have broadband or people live in deprived areas. It actually goes much more across society than that. So I'm looking forward to the BCS actually spending quite a lot of time thinking not only about diversity, which continues to be absolutely critical, and standards, which is also really critical, but also this issue around digital poverty. If we can't address that in this country, then we can't make IT good for society. Now, we've just got a few minutes left. We don't have any other open questions from our invited audience. I did want to ask you both a question to close, and it's up to you to whether you choose to answer this, but this video is coming out on International Women's Day, And International Women's Day is running a program this year called Choose to Challenge. And the idea is that everybody will be asked to, people will be asked to put a challenge out. What would you challenge people to do to improve the world for women, and from a BCS point of view, to improve life in the IT profession? Wendy, what do you think your challenge would be?
Well, I'm going to tell you a story first, because I wanted to tell this story about Steve's speeches, and I'll come to my point, which is when so Steve was the first female president of the BCS, and I was the second, and Steve terrified me, right? Back in those days, still does a bit. And so she, I don't know, I suppose you emailed me, I can't remember, you might have written me a letter back then and said, Wendy, I'd like to take you out to dinner to talk to you about being president. And I was terribly excited, and we met in your club. It's it was a medical, one of the medical institutions, for dinner. And so I was really privileged to have time alone with Steve, and she brought with her all her speeches, right? Do you remember this?
No.
She brought the speeches that are in, no, I can't imagine she brought all of them, but she brought a lot of speeches. She said to me, it wasn't all the speeches, but it was the BCS speeches, right? I think possibly Worshipful Company ones as well, but definitely BCS speeches. And she said, look, this is the record of what I did with my presidential year. And I was both I thought, don't do that, because I'm not a speechwriter. And I give very few speeches as such. Mainly this, but when I'm president, you do have to occasionally give a speech that you write before, because you've got to say certain things. But generally, I tend to speak off the cuff, and I'm one of those people that's writing notes as I go up on stage and think what I want to say at the time. So I thought, well, I'm not gonna change my spots in that sense. So I did my year differently. And I don't know if I ever told you this, Steve, I probably did, but I did a multimedia year. So every time where I went during my BCS presidency, in those days, there were no smartphones, but I had a camera that took video. They were just around. And I took lots of photos, but video shots as well, of everything I did as a president. And then my wonderful husband put all that together as a video at the end of my presidency.
What a lovely thing to keep.
Yeah.
So I've got that. So I'm thinking that I've got to write my autobiography one day, but I'm thinking it won't be a written book. It's got to be something different for me. Anyway, so that's that. And my challenge is, I'm afraid I might get a bit of stick for this, but my challenge is very much that I as anyone who knows me knows I'm passionate about diversity in the broadest of senses. Inclusivity is so important, and we need a more diverse industry. But we still, 30 years after I started in this industry, the number of women in this industry is staggeringly low, right? The number of women we have on our courses, computer science courses at Southampton and everywhere, are still, I think, staggeringly low. So my challenge is, we are 50%.
Cool.
Love it.
Simple as that. Everything.
Steve, what's yours?
Oh, I think I would go outside the IT industry, which really is not my world anymore. I think the challenge that I need to do is to really understand what's happening with the environment, because I've been an ally of some of these conservationists. And when they started, I thought, oh, these young people, I really didn't appreciate how important it was. But I feel ill-informed. And this year, I'm going to get informed about the environment.
I love that. Now, sadly, we are out of time.
Environment, watch out.
I know. I was just thinking that.
Dame Stephanie's coming to get you.
I'm gonna watch with very great interest. So sadly, we're out of time. I'd like to thank you both so much, Wendy and Steve, for joining me today to make this video. You were inspiring BCS presidents that made such a difference at the time that you were president. And you continue to be inspiring and leaders in our profession and across our industry. So thank you very much indeed.
And thank you, Rebecca.
All the very best for the BCS and for you personally.
Thank you.